Okay, so we can begin. Hi everybody. Okay. Hi everybody, and of course, thank you to Dr. Shireen Mazari and the staff at the Strategic Studies Institute Islamabad for inviting me to speak to you all today about the evolution of Pakistan-Russia relations. These two great powers have been engaged in a fast-moving and all-encompassing rapprochement over the past couple of years. And it's very important to understand the state of their present relations and how they got to this point in order to accurately forecast the future of the relationship. This developing partnership caught many observers by surprise because few could have imagined that these two Cold War-era rivals would ever be so close with one another that they'd be coordinating a Moscow-based Afghan peace process and even staging bilateral military drills together. But this just goes to show how much has changed in the past couple of years, both internationally and within these two great powers themselves. So I want to start off by talking about what's happening across the world at large, and then describing the systemic paradigm shift that is taking place and how this has influenced Russia and Pakistan to enter into their rapprochement. The first thing to understand is that there are two competing globalization models: US-led Western globalization and Chinese-led Silk Road globalization. The US wants to retain the existing world order that it still controls to a large extent, while China wants to progressively reform it into a more equitable system with multiple stakeholders. The American-led system depends on maritime trade in the Atlantic and Pacific, while its future Chinese-led replacement envisions overland trade across the Eurasian supercontinent as undergirding Silk Road globalization. China's One Belt, One Road global vision of new Silk Road connectivity is in essence the skeleton of the emerging multipolar world order, which accordingly makes it a threat to the existing unipolar one. The rerouting of global trade and creation of new marketplaces through OBOR will inevitably have political consequences because it will help pioneer the creation of new multipolar institutions whose members eventually divest from their unipolar counterparts in replacing US-led Western globalization with Silk Road globalization. Russia and Pakistan are stakeholders in OBOR through the Eurasian Land Bridge and China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, respectively, as they each believe that they have more to gain from a progressively reformed international system which gives them a more equitable stake in its affairs than to continue with the existing one where they're marginalized and contained. The ideology of Silk Road globalization is simple. Either one supports integration and stability, or they advocate obstructionism and instability. China wants to integrate with Russia and Pakistan as it seeks to develop new trade routes, access new marketplaces, and contribute to the long-term stabilization of its neighboring great powers, while the US wants to obstruct this from happening by destabilizing them in order to preserve its hold over the global system. Accordingly, Afghanistan emerges as the most crucial focal point of American pressure because of the potential that this state's prolonged destabilization has in disrupting China's multipolar transnational connected infrastructure projects, or Silk Roads, with Russia and Pakistan. Understanding that the problems in Afghanistan could easily spread to Central and South Asia if they're not adequately resolved. This shared interest in Afghanistan's stability is what most immediately brought Russia and Pakistan together for a common cause, since they both understand how necessary it is to contain the chaos emanating from this trans-regional pitted state in order to ensure the success of China's global, paradigm-changing infrastructure projects that are set to revolutionize international relations. As a result of this imperative, Russia and Pakistan drew closer to one another in coordinating their diplomatic and political responses to the war in Afghanistan, with the outcome being the incipient Moscow peace process. However, as we know, relations didn't just stop there, as they become all-encompassing and truly comprehensive. And the credit goes to both leaderships for being brave enough to step away from the long shadow of the past in charting a new future together. Pakistan has always positioned itself as the consummate balancer in trying to maintain ties with as many different parties as possible. But this strategy was recently infused with China's win-win paradigm of pragmatism through seatbelting, and this inspired Islamabad to move beyond the 1980s and recognize that the Russian Federation of today is not the Soviet Union of the Cold War. Likewise, Russia was also equally influenced by the Chinese model of partnership in agreeing to restart relations with Pakistan from a blank slate in overcoming the historical challenges, and finally seeing the Pakistan of today as different from the one of the Cold War past. There's a bit more behind it from the Russian side, though, and I want to explain that a bit more. This comes from how the country envisions its 21st century geostrategic role in being the supreme balancing force in the Eurasian supercontinent. And to that end, Russia absolutely must have as positive of relations as possible with all parties in the landmass, including non-traditional ones such as Pakistan. The foreign policy progressives, as I call them, understand the value in clinching new and exciting partnerships with Azerbaijan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and of course Pakistan, which altogether constitute what I've also called the Ummah pivots. I believe that this foreign policy faction is evidently on the rise in Moscow and has come to replace the so-called conservatives, who were inflexible in their thinking and never wanted to do anything that could even remotely be interpreted as relatively disadvantageous to their traditional partners in Armenia, Syria, Iran, and India. That line of thinking may have worked somewhat well for Russia in the era of US-led Western globalization, but it's an obstacle to Chinese-led Silk Road globalization. And it appears as though President Putin's support of China's Old War has positively influenced Russia's permanent decision-making bureaucracies in the military, intelligence, and diplomatic spheres, or deep states, to more robustly engage with their non-traditional counterparts in preparing for the expanded multilateralism and continental integration that will accompany the emerging multipolar world order. It's important to point out here that none of this is aimed against anyone, but that it will probably be interpreted as such by those parties who are led by zero-sum decision-makers that don't believe in win-win solutions. Moreover, it's expected that hostile, third-party actors will try to exploit this sentiment for their own gain. Now, folks, to speak more directly, Russia's approach with Pakistan is not aimed against India, but some voices in New Delhi seem to believe that it is. And they're being encouraged to think that way by the United States. Likewise, Pakistan's approach with Russia is not aimed against the United States, but India wants America to see it that way in order to widen the rift between Islamabad and Washington. In both cases, the US and India have a stake in convincing one another that their traditional partners' approachment with their arch rival is somehow directed against them, which interestingly results in the shared outcome of India and the US drawing even closer to one another, something which has already been a steady trend for some time, but received a major boost after last year's Lamoa agreement and Trump's election. It should be said in connection with this that both the US and India are opposed to China's Silk Road globalization, which is yet another commonality between them, but simultaneously a major point of divergence with their traditional Pakistani and Russian partners, respectively. Altogether, an interesting contrast begins to emerge. Russia and Pakistan's traditional partners are against their Silk Road coordination with China, while these two Cold War-era rivals happen to find themselves in agreement about the wisdom in working with Beijing on this matter. Moreover, not only are Russia and Pakistan in agreement about the need to incorporate the Taliban into a political solution to the war in Afghanistan, but India and the US, their traditional partners respectively, are also against this, thus furthering the growing strategic divide between these historic pairs of partners and adding a major boost to the Russian-Pakistani rapprochement. Again, to remind everyone, Moscow and Islamabad's recent betterment in relations was not aimed against New Delhi or Washington. But India and the US's reaction to it afterwards is shaping the optics in such a way that this appears to look like a self-fulfilling prophecy for them, even though it isn't. From Russia and Pakistan's perspective, their Afghan coordination, which was the driver of their rapprochement, was initiated out of the shared interest that they have in stabilizing their borderlands, and therefore ensuring the security of the game-changing new Silk Road projects that will traverse through their territory. Political cooperation soon gave way to military cooperation, which is why the two sides decided to stage their first ever joint military exercises last year in Pakistan, and just recently concluded their second drill in Russia over a month ago. Their anti-terrorist ties don't just take political, diplomatic, and military dimensions, but are also incorporating a degree of economic ones as well, though this segment lags behind the others due to the geographic distance between the two states. What I mean by economic measures against terrorism is simple enough to understand, and it's that an improvement in living conditions usually serves as a buffer against terrorist recruitment. In the Pakistani case, impoverished individuals are vulnerable to falling under the sway of extremist and militant ideologies. So it follows that lifting these people out of poverty is indirectly a national security concern in and of itself. CPEC will definitely help with this when it comes to jobs, but Russia could also play a role in its own way through its plan to build a north-south gas pipeline to reliably supply the population with energy, as well as what I call the South Asian Stream project that it wants to construct between Iran, Pakistan, and India. Taken together, Chinese jobs and Russian-supplied energy can go a long way in lifting people out of poverty and powerfully enhancing the soft vector of any multilateral anti-terrorist strategy. This tangent will still take some time to fully develop, but events are moving along a positive trajectory in any case. Though this cornerstone of the Russian-Pakistani rapprochement will remain incomplete until both parties develop more robust trade ties in the commercial sector of the economy, which is where CPEC comes in. Although the Russian government has been ambiguous about its willingness to participate in CPEC in order to preserve its delicate 21st century geostrategic balancing act, particularly as it relates to India, this does not mean that all Russian companies can partake in this project or trade goods along the route. To the contrary, the lack of Russian state investment in CPEC could be compensated by an increase in Russian private investment, with the future eye on extending CPEC from its Xinjiang hub to southern Siberia one day. This could add a significant robustness to Russia's own pivot to Asia by making it more than just about east-west connectivity, China, and the virgin Russian Far East, and broadening it to include north-south connectivity, Central and South Asia, and resource-rich Siberia. Seeing as how Russia intends to become the crossroad of Eurasian connectivity projects in the future, it makes sense for Moscow to begin considering these possibilities, and the private sector could help lead the way. At this point, we've reviewed the origins of the Russian-Pakistani rapprochement, touched upon its diplomatic, military, and energy manifestations, and provided a glimpse of its economic future. So, continuing with the forward-looking momentum, let's take a look at what else we could possibly expect in the coming years. Before proceeding, let's remember how the basis for all of this has been both sides' shared security interest in Afghanistan. But while their former Cold War era battleground made the whole rapprochement possible, it's not capable of breaking it. This is because the future of Russian-Pakistani relations, while greatly influenced by the course of the war in Afghanistan, is no longer held hostage to it or dependent on it. Both sides hope that their joint diplomatic cooperation will yield positive and peaceful dividends. But if the situation deteriorates in Afghanistan, that does not mean that the rapprochement will as well. Their partnership would obviously be strengthened by success, but it'll still survive and even thrive regardless. The diversification of Russian-Pakistani relations in the past couple of years, from their common peace-seeking ground in Afghanistan to military, energy, and even institutional cooperation via the Shanghai Cooperation Organization testifies to the fact that both countries' leaderships are dedicated to enhancing all-around relations with one another. That said, their political diplomatic coordination in Afghanistan is still expected to be the centerpiece of their relationship, especially given that Trump's planned escalation there will probably make the situation much worse, thereby necessitating even Russian-Pakistani coordination, particularly in getting all regional stakeholders on board with the Moscow peace process. Relatedly, the worsening military situation in Afghanistan and consequent threat of a terrorist spillover in both the north and south directions will likely prompt more joint drills with one another, and possibly see some Russian arms sales, as bilateral trust continues climbing to newer heights as a result. Now, it's important to clarify here that any improvement in the future of Russian-Pakistani military relations, especially including weapons deals, would not be against India or the U.S., but would be interpreted by them that way and therefore misportrayed in their mainstream media outlets as such. India and the U.S. are looking for a publicly plausible pretext to enhance their own military relations with one another, and promoting this false narrative provides them with exactly that. Moreover, there's a key difference between Russian and American arms sales, and it's that Russia sells weapons in order to maintain the balance of power between competing parties, while the U.S. does so in order to disrupt this balance in favor of its preferred partner at any given time. This explains why Russia sells arms to Armenia and Azerbaijan, India and China and Vietnam, and why it's also taken to practicing S-400 diplomacy with Turkey and Saudi Arabia lately to complement its existing weapons trade with Syria and Iran, respectively. Bearing this model in mind, it's conceivable that the decision might one day be made to balance South Asian military affairs in a similar way, in accordance with the same paradigm presently being applied towards the Mideast and Southeast Asia, which could therefore see the sale of conventional weapon systems to Pakistan beyond those that are most likely to be used in a strictly anti-terrorist capacity, such as the 4 attack helicopters that Pakistan recently received. If the U.S.-Indian military partnership begins to threaten Russia's market share or pose a destabilizing regional challenge, then Moscow might compensate by strengthening its own military partnership with Islamabad for financial and strategic reasons. As of now, however, it can be expected that military ties will proceed at a careful pace, because Russia does not want to upset India and inadvertently engender the scenario that I just described. Moving ahead, the energy ties between Russia and Pakistan are forecast to expand as progress is made on the north-south gas pipeline, what I call South Asian Stream between Iran, Pakistan, and India, and possibly other projects as well. While real sector economic relations will probably continue to lag behind all the others until more progress is made on this front. Therefore, a positive suggestion would be to promote the Central Asian and Siberian connectivity potentials of CPEC to Russian and Pakistani businessmen. Both stay connected and private, since they'll eventually become the vanguard ambassadors of their homelands in each other's country as they pioneer the next person-to-person phase of the Russian-Pakistani rapprochement. Complementary to this, both sides need to continue promoting their cultural and soft power, including through more academic exchanges and tourism, which can help bridge the geographic gap that impedes the expansion of their socio-economic relations. But it's ironically this same geographic distance that made it so that the two sides will never fall into the same historical pattern of rivalry as before. This distance therefore strengthens their diplomatic and military relations and contributes to more solid state-to-state trust. As a result, they've now decided to cooperate and no longer compete in Afghanistan in seeking to promote their shared security interests there, which are tied to protecting the Chinese-linked new Silk Road corridors through their territory that are building the basis for the emerging multipolar world order that they're so interested in having a stake in. To wrap it all up and conclude, the Russian-Pakistani rapprochement began because of their anti-terrorist concerns in Afghanistan, but has since blossomed into the comprehensive development of full-spectrum relations, with the diplomatic vector being the strongest, but the economic one ultimately being the most promising in terms of their future Silk Road Globalization partnership. So, folks, that's about it, and thank you so much for listening to my thoughts on the future development of Russian-Pakistani relations.
Thank you, Andrew, for a very interesting and very illuminating talk. I will now not keep you from your audience. I will open the floor for questions. But I would like to request all of you to please keep your questions short so that everybody gets a chance to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Nishan. I'm from Studies Institute. I'm working as a researcher there. And my question is that there is clear statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry that Russia is not interested in becoming part of CPEC, but they are interested in joining one Belt, One Road initiative with European Economic Union. If Russia is not interested in becoming part of CPEC, then how can the economic relations between Pakistan and Russia improve?
Thank you. This is a very good question. I actually wrote about it about a year ago for my friend Almas Hyder's regional report. But to tell you my thoughts on this, like I mentioned, Russia is playing a very delicate balancing act with India. It understands that if the Russian government, like, remember, these are my own personal opinions, just so you know, speaking in a private capacity. If the Russian government decides to give its full-fledged endorsement of CPEC, immediately there's going to be Indian counter-reaction. And Russia, however you want to look at it, I mean, they make billions of dollars off of Indian trade in the military sector and also with nuclear power plants. And in this sense, India has some type of leverage that impedes what I think the Russian government might think about CPEC. But you brought up a great point, sir. You brought up that Russia wants to join OBOR, One Belt, One Road. President Putin announced about a week or two ago this Greater Eurasia project, which is going to be Eurasian Union, STO, One Belt, One Road. And it makes you think, how can you be in these projects but not support CPEC when CPEC's the flagship? And herein we go with the explanation I mentioned in the speech. Just because the Russian government doesn't say, here's a stamp of approval, we support it, we want to invest in it, it doesn't stop Russian businessmen from getting involved in it. Any Russian businessman, like in any free country, can invest anywhere they want. Just because the government isn't openly facilitating that doesn't mean it's not possible. So we can take an example of, I know CPEC has many partners. For example, Saudi Arabia wants to get involved, many other countries. It's not just going to be their governments getting involved, but of course the private sector. CPEC is made to facilitate trade. With this in mind, bearing in mind that we don't have approval by the Russian government for CPEC, that doesn't mean Russia itself can't get involved. That just means, as I argued, the private sector can lead that. And the private sector, because they're not diplomats, they're not in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they can say different things and behave different in the private individual capacities than the Russian government can, for example. This allows for more flexibility and freedom of maneuver, because what a Russian businessman does, whatever India may think about that, their businessmen can do the same thing anywhere else in the world. I mean, this is the private sector, it's not the diplomatic sector. So in a sense, at first, I almost had mixed feelings when I heard that announcement, and then I thought to myself, what does it mean? And that's why I wrote the article for Almas Hyder's regional report about, like, what does Russia have in mind about CPEC? How do we explain the CPEC strategy? And this is how I formulated it. And keeping this in mind, even though Russia sends a signal, okay, officially we're not getting involved with CPEC, the signal of getting involved with the Silk Road and President Putin's personal endorsement of that is much more powerful than any other type of signal that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can give, because you have the head of the country, one of the most powerful people in the world, saying he endorses OBOR, which I interpret as a signal of tacit endorsement for CPEC that can't be openly said for political reasons, given Russia's balancing strategy with India. But remember, the private sector can do whatever they want. Doesn't matter what country you're in. Investors can invest anywhere. Nothing is stopping a Russian businessman from coming to Islamabad tomorrow and signing deals on CPEC. The same as nothing is stopping a Pakistani businessman from going to Russia, signing business deals for transporting his or her goods along CPEC through this north-south corridor to Xinjiang and southern Siberia, and even through Central Asia, let's say. So I hope I answered your question. You're welcome.
More questions? Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum. It is Bahadur Hosseini from Islamic Republic News Agency, IRNA. My question is, in the case of regional cooperation, how can Russia, Iran and Pakistan can cooperate with each other, not only in CPEC but in different fields? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That is certainly a very topical issue. I'm familiar with the ups and downs of Pakistani-Iranian relations. They go quite far back. They've had different periods. Lately, however, they seem to be enjoying a renaissance. And in a way, I see some similarity to the Russian-Pakistani approachment with Pakistani-Iranian, shared security threat. In this case, I'd like to remind everyone of what happened in May of this year. There was a cross-border terrorist attack that occurred in Iran. In Iran, there was some speculation that these terrorists may have emerged from Pakistan. For a moment, there was some disagreement from both sides. Thanks to a very brilliant shuttle diplomacy by both, situation was resolved and both sides came together. Now, what do I think happened? Now, if I may speculate a bit, or rather analyze, given what I see as the context here, what happened in May wasn't Pakistani inspired. I believe this is what RAW was involved in. I wrote an article at the time. I said RAW plus Daesh equals Jundala 2.0. And by that what I mean is you have Indian intelligence agencies working with nowadays the worst terrorist organization in the world, Daesh, and trying to create a quote-unquote self-sustaining terrorist movement inside of Balochistan for the purpose of destabilizing CPEC. Now, this also involves Iran as well because of the shared tri-state Balochistan region. Because of the spillover of this terrorist attack that I believe is influenced in one degree or another by RAW, as we know from Kabushan Yadav and his testimony of wanting to destabilize CPEC and everything, I believe the point was this. The point was to provoke a deterioration in Pakistani-Iranian relations because Pakistan and Iran need one another in the Silk Road century. Both have their own shared security concerns for their own Chinese projects. Pakistan has CPEC. Iran one day would like a high-speed railroad from Tehran to Xinjiang through Central Asia. Now, if you have this transnational Baloch issue aggravated by the U.S. and orchestrated by India taking place in this shared border region, it can create a lot of distrust. To Pakistan and Iran's credit, I believe that this shared third-party threat was communicated to them. Just like Russia's balancing, Iran is balancing as well with India. They have their own reasons for it, and they're doing it in their own way. But I think that Iran understood this. Why do I think that? Because Pakistan and Iran decided to have joint border patrols. Now relations are a lot better than they were in May. In the past 6 months, 5 months, what happened in the past 5 months? I believe that the military apparatus of both countries and intelligence apparatus were talking about what was happening. China might have even worked in the background to kind of inform Iran, because China and Iran are very close, about what's happening. And I give both sides credit for coming together with a shared security threat of Indian-inspired Baloch terrorism against CPEC that would inevitably spill over into Chabahar. The question might come to mind, well, yeah, it could spill over into Chabahar. Isn't India investing there? Look, India would throw away this small project of Chabahar if it's worth destabilizing CPEC. If they can get rid of CPEC and they just have to sacrifice Chabahar, they'll do it in a second, okay? They don't care, and actually, India can get a couple points with the United States if it's destabilizing Iran indirectly. If it's destabilizing Iran, Pakistan, and China through the support of Baloch terrorism in this transborder region, imagine how happy the United States would feel about that. And India is doing everything they can to advance American objectives. I think this was communicated. I also think, look what happened this summer. Prime Minister Modi went to Israel. In my personal capacity, I don't recognize it, but I understand it is, a UN member state. But he went there. He was in the water with Benjamin Netanyahu in his bare feet. I'm sure Iran saw that. I'm sure they saw that, and I'm sure they thought for a second, here's Modi hanging out with Netanyahu, our sworn enemy. Then previously we had this Baloch terrorist provocation. Maybe we should listen to what our Pakistani colleagues are saying. Maybe they're telling us the truth about our Indian so-called partners. So they came together there. That's beginning to answer your question. I had to address that because I think it's very important. Regional cooperation, what are the levels? Of course we have Afghanistan. Just like the threats from Afghanistan can go south against CPEC, they can go into Central Asia. I mentioned this in the course of my speech. That would disrupt Russia's own Silk Road project. But most immediately, there's an overlap of Iranian interest. If Iran wants an overland Silk Road corridor from Xinjiang to Iran, which can go further afield to Turkey and eventually the Balkans and the EU for that matter, they must ensure Central Asia security. I understand that Iran has its own history with the Taliban. I understand they're never going to agree. Iran will never endorse a Taliban political solution, but the best they can do is not disrupt it, is not stop it, is not stand in the way of what I view as an historically inevitable political solution to the war in Afghanistan. If Pakistan and Iran are now, as I believe, they have the same shared security interest vis-a-vis Balochistan and external destabilization of their shared region, and if they understand this in Balochistan, certainly they understand it in Afghanistan. As proof of this, Iran is also part of this incipient Moscow peace process. This format can provide Iran with a way to just passively allow Russia, China, and Pakistan to do what they do, and Iran just sits there. They can passively allow it. They don't have to stop it. They just passively allow it. They don't have to endorse it. Just let it go on, right? So now, if we're going to take it to the next level of regional cooperation between these, we see Russia is directly getting involved in helping. This recent South Asian Stream project that I call it, when President Putin was in Tehran meeting with Rouhani, to have Rosneft, the state Russian oil giant, in general it's an energy giant, they're known for oil, but they've diversified into gas in the past couple of years. For them to build a tri-state pipeline from Iran, Pakistan, India, that shows already. Russia is interested. Russia is interested in helping these two. The Iran-Pakistan pipeline, that project had a lot of challenges. We should all be familiar with that. But now Russia's jumping in, and Russia means business. No one can build a pipeline better than Russia can. When Russia signs a pipeline deal, they're going to make sure it gets built. They're going to do everything they can. That is a step in the right direction of solidifying this diplomatic military coordination between Iran and Pakistan and giving it something tangible to look at. It's overcoming the decades-long problem of this Iran-Pakistan pipeline. And on top of that, because the final destination is India, this gives India, at least, it makes India think twice about what they would do. If it's a pipeline, as the TASS reported, I believe, that there will be a branch that should go to Gwadar or elsewhere in Pakistan. I mean, India, of course, India wants to blow up any pipeline in Pakistan, but would they blow up a Russian pipeline? That might be a step too far, even for Modi himself. Even for Modi himself. And think about this. Once Russia gets some skin in the game, once Russia has a physical investment on the ground, Russia has, it's plausible, there's a reason for Russia to get diplomatically involved now. Because Russia is going to have a multi-billion-dollar investment going across 3 countries. Now Russia has a tangible stake, a tangible interest in potentially balancing the region, as well as preserving this great state of affairs between Iran and Pakistan, given Russia and Iran's excellent coordination with the Astana process for Syria. So we also see, just like Russia is involved with Syria and Afghanistan, so too is Iran. Iran is involved in Syria with the Astana process, and involved in Afghanistan because of the Moscow process. So now we're seeing this Russian-Iranian nexus playing more of a stabilizing force in this trans-regional space of West Asia, Mideast, Central Asia, and South Asia, with Iran being the regional party there, and Russia being the external actor that's trying to balance and preserve peace. The previous external actor, the United States, was trying to keep them apart. Russia's trying to bring them closer together. So yeah, thank you for the thought-provoking question.
Right, I'm Samrat from Center for International Strategic Studies. Continuing with what you just said about India not taking a chance against Russia, in recent weeks and days we have noticed that what's happened with the submarine that Russia provided to India, that episode is sort of detrimental to the whole idea of strategic security that Russia forced to India. So in that context, what is the future of Russia-India weapons deal, and how exactly is Russia really serious with a country like India, which has allowed the US technical team to visit a very important part of the Russian military equipment? So your comments on that, please.
Thank you. Fantastic question. Now, just remember, just to reiterate, I'm speaking in my own private capacity with my own opinion. I don't have any inside knowledge. I'm just analyzing based on how I interpret events and how I interpret the relations. First thing is that, I mean, I read about the report in Mitra TASS. My colleague Alex works for TASS, and I read about this report there, which was shared originally from Kommersant, which is a very popular Russian daily. It's very widely respected, and it means business. It's very serious. Now, I read about the report. I was even pretty shocked myself. I thought this was a bit of a bridge too far, too. I thought this was really, really overboard. Now, India says, oh, it's just fake news from France and this and that. But look, here's how I look at this, okay? This report is very serious. Very, very serious. I personally do not believe that a respected publication like Kommersant would run with this story unless the sources were 100% true. This is my personal feeling. Otherwise, because if the story was fake, it is endangering a multi-billion-dollar weapons deals. It is enormous if it's true. Therefore, I don't think it's fake news. I don't think it's just France calling up Kommersant and saying, I saw this. I think there are really real sources, whoever or whatever they may be, that have convinced Kommersant that yes, this is a very sensitive story. We're running with it because it's real. And also, TASS, I do not think that TASS would have reported on this had it been some type of fake news, right? So having said that, I want to proceed from the presumption that this is true. That India put American boots on a Russian nuclear sub. The U.S. always wants boots on the ground, and they got their boots on a Russian sub, is what I believe. I think that if we look at the Russian reaction, yeah, there has been no reaction. I think that in and of itself says a lot. If this was fake news, if this was just totally invented by the French, Russian arms lobby to take away from Russia's dominance of the Indian weapons industry, I think the Russian foreign ministry would have said something. I think the presidential spokesman would have said something. There would have been some type of comment, okay? Because there isn't, I believe what's going on behind the scenes is very serious. Now, that being said, I mean, weapons deals with India are strategic and obviously financial. Strategic from the sense of balancing, as I mentioned, preserving this old partnership that has become less romantic and more strictly commercial than what it was during the Cold War. I mean, I sometimes quip that the saying of Rusi Hindi bye-bye has gone bye-bye. I mean, it's more pragmatic in this case, right? This is my personal view, right? So they want to retain that for strategic reasons as well. But financially, in an era of sanctions, with the Western sanctions, weapons deals with India provide Russian Federation with a lot of cash, a lot of currency. It's very important in that context. So I don't think, I mean, I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I don't think one should expect split-second divorce of the arms industries simply because it's not feasible. I mean, India has so many Russian and Soviet-era weapons. They've inherited such a legacy. They just can't transition with the snap of a finger. They are already moving in that direction with arms sales from the United States and especially the so-called Israel. I mean, Israel is India's third largest weapons partner. That alone has made Israel one of the world's top 10 weapons exporters. I mean, what's that tell you already? Russia sees the direction it's going. I don't think Russia wants to accelerate that trend, but at the same time, if, as I presume, this report is serious for the reasons I explained, I would question, I think that Russia would probably be wondering, at the very least, don't think they're going to transfer technology to India to make in India, because it's the same as making in America in this case. So I'm not sure they're going to do that. I can't speak on anyone's behalf. My personal feeling is that if the story is true, as I presume, from which I'm proceeding, it wouldn't be the smartest thing for Russia to build weapons factories in India like Modi wants. At the very least, sell India whatever you might sell them, but even that might be in question because, I mean, do you want an American pilot flying the newest Sukhoi? I don't think that's smart to put an American pilot in the cockpit for Modi's next stunt. I don't think that's smart. I think that's something, if he's already putting boots in a nuclear sub, next thing you know, maybe if Trump visits New Delhi, he'll show Trump a bunch of Russian military equipment to show off. Who knows at this point? At this point, I think that, to reiterate, the fact that there is no official response is a response itself. If it was fake news, there'd be a response. Whenever there's fake news about Russia, Russia responds. Russia has not responded in this case. We should presume there's some seriousness to these claims. And on top of that, this will probably contribute to a worsening of the trust. I mean, this Rusi Hindi bye-bye is for sure bye-bye. It's for sure gone. It is just commercial and strategic. There is no brotherhood. It's great to talk about brotherhood. That's my opinion, of course. Great to talk about the legacy. Great to talk about the memory. But we have to remember, I mean, this historical memory I mean, just remember what happened last week. American boots and a Russian nuclear sub. That's the real memory. And I think that's the memory that's going to influence relations forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Andrew, thank you. My name is Khalid Nanouri. I'm a former Director General of Arms Control. Thank you for this expose. I hear you when you say that, when you bring out the need for the balancing act and also the evolution of the regional groupings. So, I wonder if you would care to expand in this backdrop the need for, or what can each side do to ensure that the sustainability of this process strengthens and also sustains for over, let's say, the next 50 years. Are there any specific ideas that you think at this point that can be done? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this balancing act, it might come as something a little bit new to some people. I mean, some people like yourself have observed it. Now I believe it is not just an observation, it is a geopolitical fact that we're seeing. Now, as it relates to Russian-Pakistani relations, yes, it needs to be sustained, it needs to be advanced, it needs to be continued into the future. I think, like I said, there needs to be some type of CPEC, Silk Road integration there. State-to-state coordination in diplomatic forums or the SCO is only going to go so far. We need to bring some real serious substance into it. And I think this Russian pipeline proposal, or this South Asian Stream as I'm calling it, is a promising step in the right direction, but there needs to be more. And if I look at any type of partnership, because of the geographic distance, it's a blessing and a curse. A blessing because they're not going to ever geopolitically compete with one another like before. We can pretty much rule that out. At the same time, the distance, also the civilizational, cultural distance, it is pretty profound. They're on different sides of Eurasia. If we account for the fact that most of the Russian population lives in the European part of Russia, right? So I think that what we really need, we need business, we need academia, but most importantly, I think, to really drive this ahead, you need information coordination. We need media coordination, and here's why. Just because the Russian and Pakistani governments might see each other differently, doesn't mean that all the people below them, the population, share these sentiments. It doesn't mean that they really understand what's happening. To some people, this is a seemingly inexplicable process. Russia, Pakistan, what happened in the 1980s Afghanistan? That's what everyone says. We need to find a way to express this to the common people, and the best way to do this is through the medium of information, be it mass media, be it mainstream media, or alternative media. This needs to be known. People need to be aware of what's happening, how it's happening, why it's happening, and where it's happening. And the fact that it's not aimed against anyone. This narrative of it being against the US or India is meant to put pressure on Russia and Pakistan to slow it down and to be more cautious and to kind of just have second guesses about this. That, oh, I might lose the money, I might lose the military, I might lose whatever. Well, look, both sides need to be fully confident that we're doing this, Russia, Pakistan. We don't care, it's not about India, it's not about the US. There might be inadvertent second-hand consequences for their grand strategies, but that's not what's driving this. Now, I think what's really important is I look at Russia's military diplomacy, like I mentioned. I see Russia's military diplomacy as balanced, like I mentioned, to preserve the balance of power between competing parties. If Russia's doing this with Saudi Arabia and Iran, I mean, these S-400 missiles, it's not Jordan that would ever shoot missiles at Saudi Arabia. The only conceivable actor that has missiles in the intent to ever, under whatever circumstances, hit Saudi Arabia is Iran. Let's face it. This is the fact. And Russia selling S-400s to Saudi Arabia shows that it is serious about balancing. If it would do that to Iran, to balance, in the interest of preserving a regional peace, I think after these American boots and the Russian nuclear sub, I think it could be an option for South Asia and Pakistan. I think this is probably the best time for both sides to talk about, hey, we should sign a similar military deal. If you're going to sell S-400s to NATO member Turkey, President Erdogan, even though you're not even going to give S-300s to Syria, your great friend President Assad, you're going to give S-400s to President Erdogan after almost 2 years ago they had the incident with the Russian jet. I mean, I think after what India did, we can make a convincing case that selling similar weapon systems to Pakistan couldn't be the most scandalous incident of Russian military diplomacy. The thing is Russia is probably thinking they're probably held back from making this military commitment, which would of course require maintenance, spare parts, you're advancing the military relationship to a higher level than just 4 attack helicopters, Russia's probably considering the economic fallout if India downscales or pulls out of projects, some of which reports indicate they're already reconsidering, like this 5th generational fighter jet. I think that basically you need to have an enhanced military partnership in the conventional arms, not just anti-terrorist. It needs to be conventional, like what we see with Saudi Arabia and what we see with Turkey. I mean, Saudi Arabia is known as being one of the U.S.'s top allies. If you're going to sell S-400 to them, I mean, you're going to sell it to Turkey, which is in NATO. Like I said, I don't think selling it to Pakistan, a major non-NATO ally, is any worse in this sense, okay? If they're already making that determination for those countries that already have a closer institutional relationship with America, I think they could make with Pakistan. The CPEC thing is really what's going to take a while. It's going to take a while because we're looking at the scale, the distance involved. Somehow we have to find the right business compatibilities. We need to pair Russians and Pakistanis together. There must be Russian-Pakistani business forums. I proposed at a different event in April, I suggested to someone that, you know, we look at Guadar. Why not have some type of, like, Pakistani Davos? You have Valdai in Russia, you have Davos, you have the Shangri-La Forum in Singapore. Why not have a Guadar gathering? Something where you bring together economic experts, military experts, diplomatic, from the Indian Ocean region. After all, CPEC is going to link not just Pakistani and Chinese trade, it's going to link all African trade to China because the sea lines of communication from East Africa to Guadar are shorter and more easily defensible than from East Africa across the Indian Ocean, past Diego Garcia, India and the U.S. Islamabad. They're basically teaming up to have interconnectivity. Through the Straits of Malacca, it's a lot easier. You hit Guadar, you go from Guadar, you go up to Xinjiang, it's protected. You just have to have joint Pakistani, Chinese, and possibly even throw on a Russian naval convoy. They're there for anti-piracy anyhow, and have them go from the Chinese naval base in Djibouti to a Pakistani base in Guadar. If you can have this Guadar gathering to show how important CPEC is, that will also provide a framework for linking Russian businessmen with African businessmen, with businessmen in the global south. Pakistan should become the fulcrum of South-South collaboration. China needs South-South development because they need new markets to offload their excess overproduction to them in order to maintain steady growth in the People's Republic, to maintain and defend social economic stability at home. To that end, because they need all the partners to work together in the Silk Road, and CPEC it's the spinal cord of this emerging multipolar world order, it's going to bring everyone together. I think Pakistan needs to position itself as that way. Also, Pakistan needs to have a rebranding that makes it attractive as a business destination. Russians don't think about Pakistan as a business destination. Maybe they think about grape mangoes, for example, if they even know about them. But I'm not sure what else they think about. There needs to be more information, hence why I mentioned mainstream, alternative media. You have different events that are publicized. You need to bring the two sides together. If you bring the two sides together and the people-to-people relations, as I said, the next step of their approach should be, then it will be sustainable. Because of Pakistan's unique geography of linking this multipolar world order together through CPEC, Russia will see the shared interest. All actors will see the shared interest. And I think that's what Pakistan should look at if it wants to sustain not only its partnership with Russia, but partnership with the global south. Pakistan is the vanguard of China, is the infrastructural vanguard of China's South-South interaction because of CPEC. And I believe that Pakistan should have a more proactive diplomatic approach. I call it CPEC diplomacy in the global south, focusing on Africa, focus on Djibouti, focus on Ethiopia. Second largest country in Africa, fastest growing economy in the world by World Bank estimates. China built their military base in Djibouti, not just to enhance maritime security in the Red Sea, but to protect the Djibouti-Addis Ababa Railway, which is China's #1 Silk Road project in Africa right now. So if you're going to get more Ethiopian and Chinese trade, and Ethiopia is China's #1 partner, and if we understand that it should probably go through CPEC, what's stopping Pakistan from engaging with Djibouti and Ethiopia as well? This should set the stage for learning how to practice the CPEC diplomacy in a very important case study that could be very profitable for Pakistan as well.
Your enthusiasm is contagious.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. This is Mohammad Shakir Awan. I'm from Institute for Strategic Studies Research and Analysis, National Defense University. Thank you, Andrew, for your enlightening thought. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. I read your article that states about Pakistan as a zipper for pan-Eurasian economic integration. I also studied your article, your piece on where you stated that Indian Rusi bye-bye is now bye-bye. So, and now I hear you speaking about 21st century Russia as a balancer. But when we see in this context the Russian act towards India that it doesn't want to take outright that it wants to join CPEC, now it doesn't want, and we see Russia following a policy of India appeasement. So this goes slightly contrary to the balancer, because if you want to be the balancer, you have to come out and you have to get rid of the what we call the burden of history. One. Number two, if Russia wants to be the balancer of 21st century, do you see it entering into conflict resolution in this region or other regions as well?
Okay, yeah, this is definitely a very profound question. I'll try to address it in the best way possible. Yes, I mean, there definitely is some hesitancy as regards Russia's engagement in South Asia, specifically because of the traditional legacy interest that it has with India. As I explained, I mean, it brings a lot of hard currency and it's also very strategic. However, my point of divergence with your original thesis is that I think balancing doesn't necessarily have to see Russia take a decisive anti-Indian stance, because that would just isolate India. Now, I'm going to bring up an example, other examples of Russian balancing, to show that Russia doesn't have to necessarily be so overt with what it's doing. And let's take a look at this, the de-escalation zones in Syria. Russia has these de-escalation zones in Syria, which, I mean, are meant to stop the violence, which is great. But let's look at the agreement for the southern de-escalation zone. No Hezbollah, no IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Special Forces from Iran. Very interesting with, you know, Russian-Iranian relationship, Russian-Syrian relationship, that Russia would agree to these terms, which are very good, quite openly. I mean, Netanyahu himself said, he spoke to President Putin and said what he's interested in having for his own interest. I mean, Russia agreed to this, it seems, for its own interest, balancing. But let's also bring in mind, every time Israel bombs Syria, Russia doesn't say anything. Every time, all Israel has to say is it's against Iran, it's against Hezbollah. I am personally thinking, my personal view, that Russia, for as close as it is with Iran, is also playing a game of balancing Iran in Syria to enhance its rapprochement. Well, it has great relations with Israel, believe it or not. Not that I endorse, I just explain what it is. And excellent rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. And trying to set the groundwork for a possible new détente with the United States. There is no state in the Middle East that wants Hezbollah and Iran in Syria except for Iran, right? Now, if Russia can play a role in decreasing, diminishing the influence that Iran, it doesn't have to kick them out, it can't kick them out, but it can't, if it can just decrease that, even though it's friends with Iran, if they understand there's a little bit of a competition going on there for the reasons I explained, I think that Russia can increase its profile with non-traditional partners for this larger paradigm of balancing. Now, taking this to South Asia and conflict resolution there, I don't envision Russia getting involved in Kashmir, for example, despite this being a UN Security Council issue right from the UN's founding. I don't see them getting involved in that, but I do see tacit signs such as endorsing One Belt, One Road. That's indirectly endorsing CPEC, which runs through Kashmir, that India, per its maximalist approach to the issue, has claimed the entirety of, including Pakistan. The fact that Russia endorses One Belt, One Road is enough of a balancing signal, if you ask me, that Russia will never go any further than that, because it doesn't want to take it to that level with India. It doesn't want to accelerate this, and I don't want to be dramatic and call it a downward trend, but a disturbing trend in their relations, right? So how can Russia get more involved with things? Well, Russia's already getting involved in conflict resolution outside of Syria. Look at Libya. Just the other day, I was reading TASS. I read Mr. Alexei's TASS all the time. It's fantastic. And he had, they were publishing a report about how Russia was involved in some political negotiations in southern Libya. That's Africa. Now we're talking about North Africa, greater Middle East. So now we see another continental presence of Russian diplomacy and balancing, bringing two different sides together in the Saharan Desert, of all places. I think that's very interesting. I think that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. I think that really shows that Russia's appeal as a balancer, that it really has, for the reasons I mentioned, what it's doing in Syria, what it's doing with military diplomacy, everything else. I think other people across the world, they see, look, if we see someone to kind of like talk to us, we can't trust the United States, it has its own interest. We can't trust some of the regional actors. But look, here's Russia, and look what they're doing in Syria, look what they're doing in the Middle East. Maybe we can have them kind of come in. I mean, they can help make some progress. And they did make some progress in southern Libya, which I thought was pleasantly surprising. So I think balancing is going to take different levels. I think we shouldn't expect that it's going to be executed perfectly. It's going to take place at the sub-state level, it's going to take place at the state level, and it's going to take place in the larger international level. But sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. There'll be some failure, there'll be some success. The fact is, what I think is important to focus on is that Russia is moving in this direction. And that's very important because as the U.S. tries to destabilize and disrupt Eurasia, Russia is countering that through very, very shrewd and interesting diplomatic and military initiatives, both direct engagement, such as what it's doing in Syria, and indirect through arms sales, with what I have termed as military diplomacy. So, all in all, I think that there is, to go back to the terminology I mentioned in my speech, you have the conservatives and the progressives. The conservatives don't want to do anything that could even offend any traditional Russian partner. And the progressives say, look, this is a Silk Road century. We have to talk to everybody. And by talking to Saudi Arabia, that might actually help Iran. By talking with, for example, Russia's doing with this Israel, for example, that might, for example, prevent a larger conflict of Israel using the pretext of IRGC and Hezbollah near the occupied Golan Heights to launch a large-scale state-to-state intervention. Maybe that's what Russia's looking at here. Even though most immediately it might look like it's against one another's interest, in the larger paradigm of things, look, it is keeping the peace. And that's what Russia's looking at. Keep the peace, stabilize, act as the bridge, bring people together, reach a political solution, have some type of mutual investment. And this is the theory. We'll see how it goes, but this is the theory. So, yeah, I think it was a really good question and provided me with a great opportunity to mention these examples. So thank you.
Then we have one more question.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to appreciate Dr. Mazari's Institute. And secondly, I welcome Andrew Korybko, second trip in last 1.5 years. I'm always appreciative of his work because he writes for the regional report. He is supportive of Euro-Asian integration and supportive of Pakistan relations. I am also monitoring Pakistan-Russian trajectory since 2003. There are a lot of improvements, there are a lot of engagement, bilateral, military, political, and I think there are a lot of business delegations have visited from both sides. But still, I think there are some stumbling blocks. I don't know what are the reasons behind, because I'm monitoring the highest level forum of Pakistan-Russia, Intergovernmental Commission, Economic Commission. There is a big agenda of cooperation and military, economic, and some of the affairs, even the culture. But no progress I'm witnessing since last 2.5 years. In 2012, there was a planned trip by President Putin, cancelled, giving the justification that there is no substantial exists between the two countries that such kind of high-level visit took place. Second, my question is, don't you think that Russia needs a comprehensive South Asian strategy? That's up to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Almas. As always, great questions and very thought-provoking, which I hope will elicit suitable response for everybody here. To go back to the stumbling blocks in Russian-Pakistani relations, I mean, we need to understand that. Okay, well, look at 2012. At that time, you had Mr. Kadaki as Russia's ambassador to India. Mr. Kadaki is a great friend of Russian-Indian ambassadors. This man is a legend in the Russian diplomatic community because of how great he is as a man and his ideas and strategy. But the one thing I say is, he's one of those conservatives. He's one of those that will always say, at the loudest way possible he can, don't do anything that can in any way offend India, period, because India is our best friend and brother. This is his idea, and he believes that he passed away in December, this was the best way for Russia. Just like all Russian diplomats are patriots, they have their own views, even if they differ, they're doing it for the right intent. Ambassador Kadaki, I mean, he was a diplomatic superpower for Russia's South Asian strategy. I think if we look at the context of 2012, I don't think it would be amiss to speculate that he may have had an influence in advising President Putin per his own idea of Russia and South Asian relations. It wouldn't be a good idea to go to Pakistan because of the reaction you would have in India at a time when India had yet to overtly side with the United States. This is the time when we saw it happening, but it wasn't yet set in stone, you know. It looked like they might have been flirting. This is even the pre-Modi time, all right? It seems like so long ago. So we need to keep that in mind. We need to keep it in that frame of reference. So I think that certainly was a stumbling block, but as I said, let's take a look at the new Russian ambassador. His name is Nikolai Kudashev, I believe. And him, there's not much available about his bio. I've read the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russian website. I wanted to see what they wrote about. There's not much. What's interesting is he speaks Mandarin, which we can infer he has a working relationship with the Chinese in one capacity or another. Now, isn't that interesting? That Russia would appoint as the successor to Ambassador Kadaki, who is just, I mean, really, he's so loved in Russia for what he did. He's a diplomatic superpower. He's hardcore conservative in this sense. They would appoint a man that also speaks Mandarin, Mr. Kardashian. A man that doesn't really have as open of a diplomatic background. He's kind of behind the scenes advising. He had worked in New Delhi for some time before, advising Mr. Kadaki, actually, from what I read in some bios. And it's pretty interesting that of all the men they picked him. I think that says a lot. I think that really says a lot about how things are changing. And I just want to point that out. It's something for you all just to kind of think about, kind of maybe pursue in your own direction of interest. It's something interesting. And although Mr. Kardashev, of course, he says a lot of the same things that Mr. Kadakian said about Russian relations, well, it's a different man saying it. Let's keep that in mind. It's a different man saying it who could potentially balance Russia, China, India, given the fact that he knows Mandarin, that he's worked with the Chinese before. So this is something interesting. Now, in the second part of your question, you spoke about comprehensive relations between, comprehensive policy for South Asia. This is much needed. Unfortunately, my experience, my own private capacity is that, from what I understand, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia's regional policies in many other places kind of collapsed. It was more about bilateral relationships, Russia, India, maybe Russia, Egypt, Russia, Syria. That's about it. Russia, Cuba, even that a little bit. Russia, Vietnam, even that was kind of getting pretty bad in the 1990s. Kind of was falling apart, right? But it descended from regional policies to bilateral because Russia had a lot of domestic issues it had to deal with. The fallout of the Soviet collapse was profound. A lot of institutions were defunded. In the period of time between 1991 and, we can say, around 2010, when Russia really got on its feet and showed that, hey, we've kind of rebuilt, we're back as a global power. In those 2 decades, a lot of diplomats resigned. I mean, we're retired. A lot of experts, they're out. There's a gap. There's an intellectual, strategic gap that had developed during this time. It is only now kind of being refilled. This is going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of time. But I think that it's promising that even among some of these older diplomatic folks, some of them see things differently. But let's take a look at Mr. Zamir Kabulov. He's Russia's special envoy for Afghan affairs. Just like Mr. Kadakian is the consummate conservative, Mr. Kabulov is the ultimate progressive, in the sense that he has been instrumental in charting positive course for Russian-Pakistani relations. But still, we're seeing more of a bilateral relationship, Russia-Pakistan, that has regional implications because of the shared security threats emanating from Afghanistan, but has yet to actually formulate a South Asian policy. But we see the building blocks here. Mr. Kudashev as the new Russian ambassador in New Delhi, and Mr. Kabulov, special envoy to Afghanistan, taking the lead in driving the Russian-Pakistani approach. We see the basics for a new regional strategy that has yet to be formulated. Now, I personally believe that Russia already has a European strategy, already has an American strategy, but I believe now it's building a Mideast strategy to build a South Asian strategy which will come together with its East Asian strategy. I mentioned this balancing, these progressives. Look what Russia's doing with Japan. They haven't even signed a World War II peace treaty. And that's why they're moving closer together. So they can have shared economic relations. And what Japan disputes is the Kuril Islands. Russia doesn't think they're disputed, but Japan disputes these southern islands. They're trying to have shared economic cooperation. Russia's courting Japanese investment. Japan is an American mutual defense ally. They're courting Japanese investments in the Far East. This shows you how pragmatic the balancing policy has gotten. So if Russia's doing this in the Mideast, developing a Mideast strategy, developing a Northeast Asian strategy, China, the Koreas, Japan, essentially what the building blocks are there for South Asia, which is the region between them, I think inevitably we will see that. Of course, I'm not a diplomat, I don't have contact with these individuals. I think it's reasonable to presume that a South Asian strategy is in the process of being formulated, but it would be wrong to put a timeline on it or have any specific expectations because we're not sure yet. Right now, South Asia is only just now returning to become a priority for Russian diplomacy. So, because it's prioritizing West Asia and Northeast Asia, but inevitably, I believe there will be one. It would make sense for Russia. They already are developing a Southeast Asian strategy, so we'll see how it goes. But I think, yeah, I think it should be taken for granted we will see a South Asian strategy. I just don't know when.
You mentioned two trends in the foreign policy stance of Russia. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I touched upon that a bit in the course of some of the questions, but it's great to refresh this idea because it's a very unique concept. Russia, just like any country in the world, any government, there are different foreign policy factions. All diplomats, all people in the country are patriotic. They just have a different way to do things. They have their different vision for how it should be. The conservatives have been in, as I presume, they had been in a position of influence. And they had been saying, don't engage with anyone that is even close to an adversary with their traditional partners. For example, that's why Russian-Azeri relations went down the tubes in the 1990s, because of Russia's relationship with Armenia, traditional partner. That's why Russia never, even though Russia was close with Turkey with some nuclear power plants and trade deals, Russia never took the steps they're taking now because of the relationship with Syria. Syria and Turkey have historically been rivals during the Cold War period and beyond. That's why Russia didn't do much with Saudi Arabia. Also, there's also a legacy of bad blood from the Afghan period because you had Iran, which Russia decided to focus on in the post-Soviet period as a linchpin of its Mideast policy. That's also why you have the relationship with India. These conservatives, they saw the policy and it makes sense. Your internal country is going through a lot of problems. The Soviet Union collapsed. Stick with what you know, right? There's enough chaos across the world, enough chaos in your home. Stick with the friends you have and what you know, and don't do anything to lose those friends. You're not going to have any friends at all, right? It makes sense. There's a logic to it for that time and historical circumstance. But as Russia began to rebuild and reassert itself and began to defend its interests and became more confident and really understood the capacities it has for leadership in all spectrums, I think that Russia began believing, well, maybe we can have some partnerships. That's why you started seeing some kind of small progress in these directions. But it wasn't until China announced One Belt, One Road that Russia really thought, you know what, if China's going to connect everybody, you don't want to connect a bunch of people that dislike each other. Let's take the lead in getting rid of the past, get rid of the historical baggage, and start off a blank slate. Russia-Turkey, blank slate. Russia-Azerbaijan, blank slate. Russia-Saudi Arabia, blank slate. Russia-Pakistan, blank slate. And let's start anew. If we're going to be together because of China, and we need Chinese investment, and we also need to be the bridge, overland bridge, linking China and Russia, let's use this as an inspiration, as the Chinese put it, win-win. Let's actually make this happen. And I think that's what really kind of was the signal to what I believe, what I call the progressive faction, to begin talking about a multifaceted, multi-alignment as Indians call it. Indians use the slogan multi-alignment, but they don't actually practice it. Russia is practicing the slogan that India pioneered, which I find to be pretty ironic there. So you have this happening, and I think that's where we're at now. You still have some conservative legacy there. I mean, you still have these legacy relations, which are great. They should be strengthened. To strengthen the existing partnerships with Armenia, Syria, Iran, India. For Russia, that's great, and it's great for other partners because if you want to talk to these countries, you can talk through Russia. Russia can help. Russia can play a role. This is the theory. It might not always work in practice. I'm very hesitant about how successful it'll be as relates Russia-India because of the direction they're moving in. But that aside, this is the policy, this is the idea. We're in the midst of a transformation of this wing of the Russian deep state, permanent bureaucracy. The permanent diplomatic bureaucracy, one faction is becoming more influential than the other, and the inspirational catalyst, I believe, is China's One Belt, One Road. So I hope I shed some further light on that, Shalise.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm Faisal Raza Khan. I'm the senior correspondent from 92 News. I'm also a fellow of the United Nations regarding climate change and all that. I'm also senior analyst working for Regional Repo, and I have seen your photo over there for the last year, last 1 year, and most welcome to Pakistan.
Thank you.
As most of the writers at the Regional Repo, they have supported most of the writers, as you are, and lots of others from Syria and all other regions. So, most welcome to Pakistan. Nice to see you. I have seen you, and nice discussion. My question is basically related to the Pak-Russia, because whatever the title is, that we have seen over the years little progress in that aspect. When we are talking about Pak-Russia relations, the diplomatic, defense, and the social perspective. Defense, yes, we have seen lifting arm embargo, and then some pieces of Mi-35, and then facilitation regarding the GF-17 Thunder engines, all the way from China, and some exercises like Korybko and all that. And when we are talking about diplomatic area, Mr. Mas has mentioned about IGC, and some joint working group might be there is a meeting in parts as well. Some bilaterals, but bit slow. But at the social sector, we are very weak on that aspect. We haven't seen any sort of progress regarding people-to-people contact, the cultural aspect, exchange of film and dramas and all that, music and all these, because these are the soft diplomatic areas in which both countries, Moscow and Islamabad, can excel. And on that aspect particularly, when we are talking about that the Russian friends, diplomats are not much open in that framework, but what we have seen in the context of the United States, when we meet with them, they are more open, they are more vibrant, they are discussing things and all that. But we haven't seen any sort of much progress in that particular area, in that arena. How do you see the defense cooperation in particular? Because when it happens that India is getting S-400 and Pakistan is getting only some pieces of Mi-35, and some of the negotiations are, Air Chief was there for, and they have visited the Su-30 and all that, but unfortunately not much progress in that aspect. How do you see that thing? And secondly, on social and cultural linkages, because that is more important and we haven't seen any sort of progress. How do you see this aspect as a soft diplomacy?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Yeah, you're certainly right. I mean, the social part of this relationship, it's lagging behind. It's probably the weakest, and it'll probably take the most work to strengthen, and it'll take the longest time to strengthen. Just because you still have that elephant in the room of the Afghan war. That's still going to be there. There are still people on both sides that remember it. They remember news footage. They maybe had family members that were involved. It's something that is just, it's there, right? I think that both sides have done a good job of not obsessing over it, actually moving past it, agreeing that what happened, happened. Let's move forward, right? Let's move forward. There's more important things. But the regular people have yet to do that. And you mentioned that our Russian diplomats, they might not be as friendly. I don't know. I haven't met the Russian diplomats here. If I would maybe think that it might be because this is so new to them. I think that this is something that's so new. And remember, they might have that in their mind. They might have that Afghan war in their mind too. Maybe they feel a little bit like, you know, it's something new for them, right? That would be an explanation that I could provide. I mean, I don't know them, but this, based on what you said, this is the first thing that comes to my mind is you have that legacy that people still remember, and it hasn't gone past. So the question comes down to, how do you get the regular person to come to terms with the Afghan war and come to terms with what happened, and all of a sudden Russia and Pakistan are friends again? Well, it comes back to what I mentioned, information. You must have this. I don't want to, when I use the word narrative, I don't mean to use that in a cynical way. I mean, there are good narratives. The positive narrative of Russia-Pakistan cooperation needs to be disseminated through media so people understand. And there needs to be some type of understanding that both sides have agreed to move past this. Yes, there is a divergence of views. Yes, there is an unfortunate history that happened, but you know what? We're moving past it. Let me tell you this. I used this in an example in a previous article, not sure if it was for Regional Report or elsewhere. If Russia can become friends with Germany, and Germany, I mean, over 26 million Soviet citizens died during World War II. If Russia can become friends with Turkey, and you had the high-profile shooting down of the anti-terrorist jet over Syria, if Russia can become friends with Iran, and of course the Islamic Republic at the time might have had some designs on the Muslim-majority regions of the Soviet Union, if Russia can become friends with China after the brief border clash and during the Cold War and the fact that China sided with the United States in the last decade of that, if Russia can become closer with Japan, I mean, after the fact they haven't even signed a World War II peace treaty, and both sides fought each other in World War II, I think that, you know what happened in Afghanistan, it can be surmounted. It can be surmounted and overcome, but if you look at the bigger picture of that, I think that's something that should be emphasized, that, you know, things happen in a different context. The world was different at the time. Both sides had their respective reasons for getting involved in that struggle, and you know what? No side should feel ashamed in this sense. Both sides should understand what happened. We're not shaming anyone. We're just saying, hey, we agree to disagree. We know what happened. We know what happened. Everyone knows about it. But you know what? Are we going to be held hostage? The people that want Russia, Pakistan to be held hostage to the Afghan war are the United States and India. Because this is an emotional issue and people react emotionally. And they want to exploit and abuse this historical memory to keep the two sides apart. So we need to find a way, I think once people understand that, I don't think there'll be anything really holding back an average Russian citizen or average Pakistani from wanting to learn or to learn Russian. But where would they learn Russian? There's no Russian Friendship Center here. See, if I had to offer some constructive advice, I think that what Russia should do, the next step should be people-to-people engagement, and it should be facilitated by the Russian embassy through the creation of a Pakistan-Russia Friendship Center that could provide opportunities for investment or whatever you're thinking about. I mean, friendship centers are all across the world. Why isn't there a Russian-Pakistan Friendship Center? Well, we know why, but why won't there be one? I think that both sides should work together on making this happen. If there's a friendship, just imagine now, if there was a Russian-Pakistan Friendship Center, you can have Russian experts coming more regularly, Russian businessmen, Russian teachers, Russian students, Russian tourists in the mountains. I heard the mountains are beautiful. Hopefully one day I'll get to see them myself. I mean, just imagine this. And imagine if there was a Pakistan Friendship Center in Moscow. That would be great. Imagine that could possibly counter the Indian narrative, which is so powerful in Russian press because of this legacy of Rusi Hindi Bible. Imagine if you had that. Then, now imagine if the Pakistan Friendship Center in Moscow and a Russian Friendship Center in Islamabad were working together. And imagine if they were working together with advice from their own respective embassies. I think that would supercharge the relationship, and that could help them make up for lost time. I think that would be really useful, and it requires a very small investment. Of course, both respective governments have to reach an agreement on that, but I think that would be something very positive. And if I had a chance, I would love to help. I would love to help in that capacity. And you also mentioned the defense of political relationship. This was also brought up. Yeah, I mean, a lot remains to be desired. I mean, like you quite rightly pointed out, Russia and India, they signed this agreement for the S-400, whereas Russia and Pakistan gets 4 attack helicopters that are mostly used in an anti-terrorist capacity for the border, right? I think, well, we need to look at the Russia-India deal, and we need to think, well, okay, it was signed, but nothing's been shipped yet. I mean, that's the first thing. I mean, I hope that for the sake of what Russia's interests are, that the deal goes through, but American boots in a Russian nuclear sub, that kind of, I think that throws all deals into question. That's what I think, right? I mean, Turkey as a NATO member hasn't done anything like that, and President Erdogan and Russia are basically fast-tracking this S-400 deal, right? I think that, if anything, Russia would stand to gain by balancing South Asian affairs to military diplomacy. To get to that point, Russia needs to overcome its fear of losing its stake in the Indian market. Looking at the present trajectory of what happened with Israel, U.S., and even France, biting into Russia's market share dominance, Russia should know that, if I sell the same thing to Pakistan, how is that offensive? I mean, how is it offensive if you sell the same thing you're selling to India to Pakistan? I mean, if India decides to make a reciprocal move because of anything Russia sells to Pakistan, let's pretend there's S-400 diplomacy. India is directly telling Russia, we're in the process of disengaging with you. Russia should overcome its fear of feeling guilty for that, for advancing its own interests. If Russia is selling S-400 to Turkey and Syria is still a close Russian partner, I even say ally, military ally, if Russia is selling S-400s to Saudi Arabia, and Iran is still working with Russia on these fronts I described, if India was responsible and had the proper intentions, India would also behave responsibly equally if Russia sold S-400 to Pakistan. But getting there is the hard part. I think it's going to take time. As I said in the closing part of the speech, that's going to take time. Russia will proceed very cautiously unless this event with the nuclear sub is proven beyond doubt and Russia decides to take decisive action, which I don't think they would be the one to initiate problems with the Russia-India military relationship. It would have to be India that takes the initiative because America's whispering in their ear, you can get your Russian planes or whatever else from us, just break off these Russians right now and use whatever excuse you have to use. That's what I think it would take. I hope it doesn't happen. If it does, that would immediately put the fast track for Russian-Pakistani military relations to recoup the lost investment, the lost money, and strategically balanced. But I wouldn't get anyone's hopes up. Just in response to the question, that's what I see. And in closing, I agree. You must have social-cultural partnership. In order to do that, you must explain the Afghan war period in a mutually respectable way that is acceptable for both populations. Agree to disagree. Agree to disagree. Russia has its situation with Germany, Turkey, all those countries. Look, you can get past killing 26 million people, most of them civilians. What happened in Afghanistan, this should be a cakewalk, right? So that's what I would advise, focusing on that, having the right narrative, agree to disagree, emphasizing how Russia had the reproach with other partners, now partners that it has a worse history with, we can say a worse history, objectively worse history with, and having some type of friendship center to enhance people-to-people partnership. What we should look for both sides should try to build positive elite in the other. Russia should build a pro-Pakistan elite with students and experts to rebuild what it lost in the Soviet period with the South Asian policy. Pakistan should build a Russian-directed elite that can help with Pakistan's northern pivot. I mean, look at CPEC. CPEC is going to bring Pakistan into civilizational contact with its brethren in Central Asia. As I understand, some of the population migrated from Central Asia historically. There are civilizational links, especially with Uzbeks. CPEC is going to bring Pakistan back together with civilizational cousins. These civilizational cousins are in the Russian sphere of interest. If Pakistan wants to talk to them, they're going to have to talk to them in Russian. Yeah. So I hope this, can provide a good framework for where to begin and where we can hopefully take things.
Last time I'd like to take the last question.
Sure.
Thank you. I want to know that this Russian intervention will cause a lot of hybrid wars. What is your take on this?
Russian intervention where? What do you mean?
In the Islamic world. American
Russian involvement.
Oh, yes. Well, I'd like to, great. This is a great concluding question. To remind everyone, I wrote this book about hybrid war. It's available for free. I have it on Amazon for Kindle. It's just a couple bucks. But you can get the free version online. I purposely put it out for free so anyone can access it. In sum, hybrid wars, as I define them, are externally provoked identity conflicts in geostrategic transit states to disrupt, control, or influence China's Silk Roads. Every Chinese Silk Road, if you look at the map, or you think about the map, has to go through a Muslim country at one time or another. Has to go through Kazakhstan to reach Russia, has to go through Central Asia, like Uzbekistan to reach Iran, has to go through Pakistan to reach the Indian Ocean. So, in one way or another, China needs to have positive relations with the global Ummah. But there is also an information campaign that is revving up to discredit China in order to create problems to make China look like the Soviet Union was during the Cold War, the old Cold War, as an atheist, Muslim-hating regime. So that people in these countries think, wow, why are we signing a deal with the devil? These evil Chinese atheists. That's the narrative. That's the information narrative meant to provoke. Not only does it provoke just people to question whether governments are making deals with the Chinese, it might make some rebel insurgent groups think, you know what, it is my duty as whatever group to fight against the Chinese project because they are atheists, and I'm so proud of my identity, and I'm so proud of whatever I'm doing, I'm going to include an anti-Chinese narrative. How this relates to Russia is simple. Russia's also had problems of perception in the global Muslim world. Historically, because of what happened with Afghanistan, the narrative was the same as they're using against China. It's literally the exact same. Communist, atheist regime suppresses Muslims. Same thing. But how does it relate nowadays? We had Chechnya stabilized, situation is pretty much developed there, everything's normal for the most part. But what Russia's been doing is you have President Putin. President Putin has been very clear. He has no problem with Muslims. He embraces Russia's Islamic identity. About 20 million Muslims live in Russia. This makes Russia has more Muslim population than Libya, for example. Russia has more Muslim population than Jordan. Islam is intrinsic to Russia's national fabric. Now, there is an information warfare going on to frame Russia as some Christian superstate, some Christian extremist state. That is very negative because it makes it seem like it's Christian at the expense of Islam. Yes, majority of Russian Orthodox Christian, but there's a substantial, important Muslim component. Take, for example, Tatarstan. It's in Eastern Europe, right by the Ural Mountains. Tatarstan has been part of Russia, the Russian state, since the 1500s. If you look, when you think about Russia, remember that big church in Red Square, the St. Basil's Cathedral with the beautiful domes? That was consecrated to commemorate the integration of Kazan, which is the capital of Tatarstan, majority Muslim region, with Russia. That's on Red Square. Okay, Russia embraces the Islam identity, but there are people in any country that are going to be xenophobic, Islamophobic, whatever. Russian government is strictly against that. To the point, I want to remind you about a Russian law. I don't remember the exact law, but Russia is very strict about banning extremist content online. Specifically, Russian nationalist content that is very anti-Islamic. They're very serious about that. Because you have so many Muslims in Russia. I mean, it's the heart of Russia. So what Russia needs to do also, Russia needs to express this better. Also, Russia has, because of the traditional partnership with Iran, like I mentioned, there is a perception that Russia favors Shias in this larger sectarian debate. But then, all of a sudden, King Salman, custodian of the two holy mosques, came to Moscow. Now that myth no longer works. Narrative no longer works. I'm glad that happened. I think King Salman's visit to Moscow was one of the best things that Russia can do for Russian-Muslim relations, because it showed that the custodian of the two holy mosques is approving of President Putin in the sense that he is being hosted by President Putin. First ever visit by a Saudi monarch to Russia, period. I think that shows that there is no, Russia is Muslim friendly. Russia is not supporting Iran or in the sense of, a Shiite invasion, whatever these crazy narratives are. Russia is actually balanced. Majority of Muslims in Russia are Sunni. So in this sense, it makes sense. Now, why would Russia support majority Shia country of Iran that could provoke sectarian conflict with its majority Sunni population? That doesn't even make sense. But unfortunately, this was a weaponized narrative. I think that Russia needs to really focus on that. Russia really needs to focus on emphasizing this. What happened with King Salman in Moscow, that was really huge. Russia really needs to find the right way to frame this, like how I did, and present to Muslims that this happened and this is so important and we are so honored that King Salman came to Moscow and gave us such if you will, it's such an honor. And this enhances Russia's credibility. But remember, hybrid wars, to go back to what I said, hybrid wars are externally provoked identity conflicts in the geostrategic transit states to disrupt, control, or influence the Chinese Silk Roads. And the Chinese Silk Roads are going to go through Russia. They're going to go through Central Asia. They're going to go through Russia's traditional sphere of influence. Therefore, Russia, just like China, they have a self-interest in cooperating with one another in explaining to the wider Ummah and their own Muslim citizens that, yeah, they're very Muslim-friendly in a sense. But there is an information warfare going on. Sometimes, like in Xinjiang, the Western media decontextualizes the Chinese military response to terrorist acts. Like if terrorists are blowing up a market, I mean, that's not a liberation struggle. That is a terrorist attack. It doesn't matter who does it or why, it's a terrorist attack. But China's actions against Xinjiang separatist terrorists have been decontextualized to be framed as China hates Muslims. Just like Russia's action, the federal intervention in Chechnya, which is a republic of Russia, was made to look like Russia is anti-Muslim. But I think now a lot of progress has been made for Russia. It's China that has the threat of this narrative. The narrative has shifted from Russia to China. Same narrative, exact same thing. has shifted to China, and they're kind of abusing that for the reasons of instilling distrust over China's new Silk Roads and trying to provide a plausible narrative for terrorist separatists to engage in hybrid wars in the transit states to sabotage the Silk Roads. I know it's a little bit big. I hope that my book explains more about the tactics that are used, specifically through social media, specifically how social media is used, which is, of course, very relevant nowadays. And then I've written different articles talking about doing different case studies of Myanmar. How does this hybrid war scenario relate to Myanmar? What factors can be used and abused? I did it for about 40 different countries for this website oriented review. But if you just type in Andrew Korybko hybrid wars, or you email me or add me on Facebook and send me a message, you can get the full text and the subsequent ones. So yeah, thank you for bringing that question. It's a really important point to emphasize. And just remember, when you see St. Basil's Cathedral, this commemorates Kazan incorporated into Russia, and Kazan is a majority Muslim region, and this shows how close Russia feels to Islam, that it would put a church consecrating the unity of Orthodox Islam on the red square next to the Kremlin. That says a lot. That can never go away. Anytime anyone says something, just look at a picture of red square and it's right there. So, yeah, thanks. Great question.
Thank you, Andrew. I would like to end this off by thanking you once again on behalf of Dr. Shirin Mazari and the Studies Institute Islamabad. And we're glad that you came here today, made time for us and spoke to the audience over here. Thank you also for identifying avenues whereby Pakistan and Moscow can work together for a better relationship in the future. And let's hope that somebody from both sides would listen to these ideas that you presented forth and do something about them. And in the end, I think I would just like to remind the audience over here that although Pakistan-Russia relations have come a very long way since the Cold War, they still have a very, very long way to go. And but like Andrew said, both sides need to be confident about the fact that this bilateral relationship is all about the need to defend against terrorism, the need to act as a balancer within the region, and also to preserve regional peace. And I think Pakistan and Russia relations from here are going to evolve into a much better relation in the future. Thank you very much.